of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I, as your governor, am reminded once again of that responsibility. For me, the responsibility starts in every classroom in our public schools, schools that were once closed to black and brown children, schools where Dr. Hollingsworth spent most of her career teaching and as a counselor. And that's why I've worked hard, Senator Perdue and other members of our General Assembly, to provide additional resources for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and why we've worked so hard on what we call the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. Martin Luther King Day served for us as a reminder of the trials and tribulations of Delawareans of African descent, as well as a celebration of their incredible resilience and their success. But it challenges all of us to reflect and recommit to the ideals of equal opportunity and fairness for all, a better future for all of our children. Dr. King famously said, "Everyone can be great because anyone can serve." And life's persistent question is, what are you doing for others? And that's the question for all of us today. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and God bless you all.
And freedom for the spirit. I believe that what self-centered man is torn down, other-centered man can build up. On this day, we remember Dr. King, the preacher of the gospel, and your servant committed to peace while speaking truth to power. In this day, O God, when there's too much hatred and greed, the proliferation of preference and privilege, the blatant disregard for black and brown bodies, let us remember that we have an example today, and we thank you for that example in Dr. King, to not only be instruments of peace and love, but agents of change. So we gather today to remember and realize what Dr. King said, that as we struggle for justice and freedom, we have a cosmic companionship. The God that we worship is a loving God, is a living God, who forever works through history for the establishment of his kingdom. So, God, give us a hunger for justice, thirst for peace and righteousness, even though we have to contend with forces and influences that attempt to undermine our honorable and godly efforts. Bless our time today to not only celebrate and remember, but to move forward with action and involvement. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Just say that in terms of remarks, it's funny, I pulled out a letter that I wrote to some students that had a competition for oratory skills, for spoken word, and it fits so much the work of the Intercity Cultural League, as well as Delaware State University, and the students that just sang before us. They were incredible. The Academy. This letter really pertained to the fact that Dr. King wasn't just about preaching and even the work that he did, but he was a writer as well. That the arts are so important. And in his autobiography, he talked about this as a young person, that he recounted the first impressions for him of civil disobedience. He said, "I became convinced that non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as cooperation with good." Dr. King wrote, "No other person has been more eloquent and passionate in getting the idea across than Henry David Thoreau." As a result of his writings and personal witness, Dr. King said, "We are the heirs of a legacy of creative protest." Creative protest. That song, "Rise Up," is creative protest. "We Shall Overcome" is creative protest. The writings, the art, they are creative protest. I also think about this theme, that together we can make the dream. And that Dr. King was a preacher, but this holiday is not just about pastors. He was an advocate, but it's not just about advocates. He was a man, but it's not just about men. And he was not quite middle-aged. It's not just about us older people, and it ain't just about the young. It's about all of us making this dream a reality. I'm so proud to be representing you in Washington, D.C. And I'm so proud of all of us in this moment, because this is a moment for all of us to rise up.
But he said, you know what, son? He said the one thing that Martin Luther King spoke about that has always rung true with me today is, and again, my father is not perfect at quoting, but he said, is that you should always judge people by the quality of their character and not by the color of their skin. And he said, and that's something that I have always internalized and carried through my life, and I hope you do the same. Now, many years later, when I was raising my own children, who are now 28 and 24, when I would come home from work, if they would have friends over, their friends looked like the United Nations, really. And it was such, at that time, going back to that period of 2008 through 2012, when they were young teenagers and having their friends over, I just remember feeling so full of hope that this country had finally turned the corner, and to see, you know, young people from different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, just all hanging out in the family room like it was just life as usual. And then certainly, like many of you, I share the sadness with, it seems like our country has taken a couple of steps back. And that's unfortunate. And I think it is really up to all of us to teach our children well. As I'm very fortunate my father did with me, and I tried to do the same for my own children. And I guess that is my message is we all have a personal responsibility within our own families, within our own community, to keep the dream of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. alive. Thank you.
Education, who has added so much to our community. So before I make my remarks about Dr. King, I'd like to recognize my longtime friend, Reuben Salters. Many of us talk about what we are going to do, how we're going to do it, but Mr. Salters had a dream of serving our community, taking care of the youth, and he fulfilled it. Thank you, Mr. Salters. Dr. Martin Luther King probably is one of the heroes and true patriots of our country. He believed that all men and women were created equal. And he didn't beat his chest. He didn't pick up an armament. He went out in the community in a peaceful voice, and a peaceful and loving voice, brought the message to us that all men are created equal. He challenged each and every one of us to fulfill the debt, to fulfill the commitment of our Constitution to all of our citizens. Do you still hear his voice? Do you see what he wanted to accomplish? Be the voice today in the commitment of Dr. Martin Luther King. Thank you.
Instructions, get up and do what I'm supposed to do, nothing more, nothing less, and sit down. But today I'm feeling just a little bit different. I think that we need to thank God for Dr. King and the whole civil rights movement, because of Dr. King and that movement, where we can gather together here today. You know, we can go to any institution of higher learning that we want to go to. Even in the public school systems, we don't have to go to segregated schools anymore. We can sit anywhere we want to ride on the bus. You know, we can drink from the same water fountains, and the list goes on and on. We need to be thankful. Somebody's asking you to thank God today. Our speaker has been a friend of mine since childhood. We both grew up right here in Dover. We attended the same church, Mount Zion AME Church in Dover. Our families were friends, still are friends. Both of our parents have deceased. Hers were Cliff and Annette Hubbard. Our parents were Luna and Hattie Michoud. And I used to visit her home quite frequently. And I don't even know if she remembers this because she's 4 years younger than I am. I was good friends with her sister Mabel, who was a year behind me. But we played together in her house. And her mother used to always have us making the box cakes to give us something to do, the Duncan Hines, Pillsbury, and so forth. We made cakes every time I went over there. And so I guess she's who introduced me to cake making. Carol was appointed as Secretary of the Delaware Department of Labor on January 21st, 2021, by Governor John Connor. In that role, she oversees and manages divisions that provide diverse employment services to Delaware workers and employers. Prior to her current position, she held several roles in state government, including leadership positions with the Department of Services for Children, Youth, and their families, and as Deputy Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Services, and served in administrative services. She also worked for the U.S. House of Representatives as a legislative assistant for Senator Tom Parker. She is my sorority sister of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She's a lifelong Delawarean, now residing in Wilmington with her daughter, Quinn. She graduated from Dover High School in 1981, Hampton University with a bachelor's degree in political science, and from Temple University Law School with a Juris Doctorate. And I have to include that every time I hear her give reports on the Black Leaders Zoom call that we have once a month with Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall-Long, I hear her and I say, Carol, I say to myself, Carol, I'm so proud of you. I think we need to learn to celebrate each other. And so I'm so proud of her accomplishments and the journey that God has her on. And so the next voice, ladies and gentlemen, you will hear will be that of the Honorable Carol Hubbard, Secretary of the Delaware Department
I want to thank you for being here as well. You've always been such a supporter of the department. We appreciate your advocacy and support of our agency and support of all Delawareans, so I thank you for that. I met several members of Dover City Council today. And when you talk about, it's not a day off, it's a day on, we're already talking about how we can work together to provide employment opportunities for citizens of Dover, and I'm looking forward to those conversations. So, thank you. And with that, good afternoon. I'm the Secretary for the State of Delaware for the Department of Labor, and I'm honored to be with you today to reflect upon and celebrate the birth and legacy of a great American hero, Dr. Martin Luther King. As it's been said, I am a proud graduate of Dover High School, the recipient of several college credits from DSU, and I lived down the street from the campus most of my life. many ways I feel at home. As I begin, I would like to thank Mr. Salters, founder of the Inner City Cultural League, for inviting me to speak to you today. Many of you know him as Reuben Salters, but he and my father were the best of friends as I was growing up, and I envisioned getting a smack across the back of my head if I were to use his first name. So please excuse the formality and familiarity I have with you, Mr. Salters. You and most of the members of Zeta Rho Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha were like second fathers to me and my sister, as was Dr. Michoud and Mrs. Michoud. Mr. Salter's vision for the African American community has always been the uplift from both a cultural, intellectual, and economic standpoint. And I know that this organization and this event represent the culmination of that vision. I would also like to thank the leaders of the Inner City Cultural League for the continued work in preparing young people to be successful in our communities. In addition, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Academy of Dover Singers, the Delaware State Choir, Sankofa String Orchestra, for gracing us with such wonderful music as part of this program, as well as all the invited guests, faculty, staff, and community members. I want to thank you all for being here today. It is you and what you represent that makes this such a special day to reflect upon the legacy of Dr. King and how he went from an undergraduate student at Morehouse College to become a beacon for justice across the world. Preparing my remarks for today has been interesting. Mr. Salters said I could talk for 5 minutes or 40 minutes. Don't worry, I won't get anywhere near 40 minutes. But in considering what to talk about today, I was challenged in preparing a focus for my remarks. All of us have participated in celebrations, acts of service, and commemorations of Dr. King, and I am always inspired by the retelling of the dream, humbled by his sacrifice, saddened by his untimely demise, and in awe of his legacy. Most of us are familiar with Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, which was delivered at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on August 28, 1963. Dr. King used the Bible to paint a picture of a better future for all, a more perfect union that emphasized equal opportunity and justice for all, regardless of race, creed, or station in life. That speech, which broadcast around the country, was a precursor to several important milestones that took place during the height of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, including passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And while that speech has framed much of what we know about Dr. King's life work, it does not fully detail the search for justice that he and many of his contemporaries were trying to pave. Dr. King always knew that the struggle for civil rights was intertwined with economic opportunity, and soon after that speech, Dr. King was compelled to confront the realities of an unequal employment landscape that disproportionately affected people of color. At the same time, there was a backdrop of a volatile societal struggle that included marches, protests, and a sense of uncertainty in our political process. This seems to parallel some of today's uncertainty, brought on in part by the pandemic, a backlash to a number of police killings of African Americans, and an economic recession. This is where the environment of 1968 and the things that led to the Poor People's Campaign intersect. How many of you, by show of hands, are familiar with Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign? Well, for those that may not be as familiar, Dr. King's Poor People Campaign was a call to poor people from across America to march on Washington to protest poor housing and poor economic conditions that were common in many communities, particularly communities of color across the nation. The campaign was an attempt to highlight the inequities of an economic system that led to extreme poverty in both rural and urban areas and kept marginalized groups from achieving the American dream. In 1968, Dr. King traveled to Memphis, Tennessee to support a citywide strike by Black sanitation workers over poor working conditions and low wages. 2 sanitation workers had been crushed to death by faulty garbage trucks that the city failed to repair, even though the safety issues were well known to management. These deaths sparked a movement by Black sanitation workers who called for better equipment, better wages, better working conditions, and overtime pay, all of which had been denied. In addressing the workers at a local church, Dr. King said, "It is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages. And I need not remind you that this is our plight as a people all over America. The vast majority of Negroes in our country are still perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity." As most of you know, this was one of the last speeches given by MLK, as a little over a month later, he would be assassinated right there in Tennessee as he returned to that city to lead a march in support of the striking workers. It is the underpinnings of the Poor People's Campaign, fairness, economic justice, that I would like everyone to consider today. At the heart of that consideration is the notion that everyone in Delaware and across the country should have access to a living wage, worker benefits, and working conditions that allow them to provide for themselves and their loved ones. This is something that is at the forefront of what we do. At the Department of Labor, our 500+ employees work hard to connect people to jobs, resources, monetary benefits, workplace protections, and labor market information that is available to promote financial independence, workplace justice, and a strong economy. It is our job to match job seekers to employers, and it's a key piece of what we do. If people are unemployed or underemployed, we help them obtain the training and education needed to lift themselves out of a job they've outgrown to one that provides the wages and benefits necessary to keep pace with rising costs. In 2021, Delaware passed legislation that raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024. This was a good step and helps Delaware remain competitive. However, a shortage of available workers in Delaware and nationwide have created conditions where opportunities for $15 per hour wages are plentiful. It may interest you to know that our job search tool called JobLink, and the website is joblink.delaware.gov. That system currently contains 15,000 job advertisements. There are less than 2,000 resumes to match those jobs in our system. So technically, everyone we have in our system could have 2 jobs. Realistically though, there's often a mismatch of jobs available and the individual skills needed to take the job. That is the reality. What we do at the Department of Labor is to provide training dollars for people to pursue the job that they want to have. We work with over 100 training organizations that run the gamut: barbering school, healthcare, computer coding, truck driving, electrical, plumbing, and the list goes on. We serve as kind of a one-stop shop for information, skill enhancement, and financial assistance for workers, employers, and job seekers. I need you to know that there is good reason to have hope. Hope for a better job, higher wages, and a more secure future. You have what it takes to elevate your wages and get that dream. Is it easy? No. Is there help and support? Yes. I can't think of a more fitting way to pay homage to Dr. King and his legacy than to be engaged in claiming the economic security that all Americans deserve. Over the last 3 years, since the aftermath of the pandemic radically altered the nature of work, how we work, whether we work, and who we work for has changed. We know that this is a continually examine the workforce. We know that this is so because we examine the workforce data to see if we can identify any behavior trends that has led to the current worker shortage. What we have learned is that workers are making different choices about employment, and employers are struggling to fill a larger than usual set of vacancies. This is a good thing. You have companies like Amazon not only paying wages over $15 per hour, but they are paying for college tuition for their employees. Banks are paying higher than ever wages, providing work-at-home options and supports. The state of Delaware is offering sign-on bonuses. It is a good time to re-examine everything. If you love your job, check the help wanted ads. If you hate your job, check the help wanted ads. If you don't have a job, for God's sake, check the help wanted ads. We need you. And right now, employers are being very flexible. Of course, not everyone will find light at the end of that tunnel. At DOL, our team works hard to eliminate the burdens and barriers of the past to help those who may have struggled in securing a job. Please reach out. At the Department of Labor, there is help, there is hope. Martin Luther King has famously said, "Whatever your life's work is, do it well. Even if it does not fall in the category of one of the so-called big professions, do it well. If it falls to you in your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures, like Shakespeare wrote poetry, like Beethoven composed music." And here, this may be one area that I agree with Dr. King. Michelangelo, Shakespeare, and Beethoven all became acclaimed later in life and spent most of their lives in poverty. So I say, if you are a street sweeper, sweep streets until you can swing a hammer, then become a carpenter, then open your own business building houses. Yes, do all of your jobs well, but always think bigger. You deserve the American dream, so go and get your dream. It is clear that access to quality employment options is as important now as it was in the 1960s. Dr. King envisioned the Poor People's Campaign as the next chapter in the struggle for genuine equality for African Americans and other marginalized groups. As we celebrate all the accomplishments that Dr. King achieved for the advancement of a greater and more equal society, let's not forget that his dream spans beyond equal justice for all, but also economic opportunity and prosperity as well. Together, we can be the dream. I wish each of you a wonderful Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration. Thank you.
Justice that is wanting in the world. Let us leave here today recommitted to the words of Dr. King when he said, "With faith, we'll be able to go on to carve a tower of hope on the mountain of despair and bring into being that great dream and create right here in America a nation where all will live together and respect the dignity and worth of the human personality. Go in peace, in the peace of God.